"By dawn, your fate will be sealed," said the gunman. After the townsfolk banished the love of his life, they shouldn't have let him see that. The horse came in limping, and the man on its back wasn't doing much better. Eli Cane rode into Dusthaven on a Tuesday afternoon with a bullet lodged somewhere beneath his left ribs and enough dried blood on his shirt to make the blacksmith's apprentice drop his hammer. The town of Dusthaven, New Mexico Territory, sat baking under the September sun like a forgotten loaf of bread, brown, cracked, and hard on all sides. It had one saloon, one church, one general store, and one unspoken rule that everyone understood without being told. Strangers weren't welcome, and famous strangers were worse. People knew the name Eli Cane the way they knew the name of a coming storm. You'd heard it before it arrived, and by the time it reached you, you'd already decided to lock your doors. He didn't look like a legend that afternoon. He looked like a man who needed water and a place to fall down in private. His dark hat was pulled low, his jaw was set hard against the pane, and his gray eyes, the color of gunmetal in winter, stayed fixed on the road ahead with the focused emptiness of someone counting seconds. He guided his horse to the trough outside the general store and let the animal drink while he sat very still in the saddle, breathing with the careful economy of a man who knew that careless breathing cost something he couldn't spare. That was when Clara Voss stepped out of the schoolhouse across the road. She was carrying a stack of primers under one arm and a bucket of water in her free hand, and she saw him the way practical women see emergencies, clearly, without drama, and with an immediate instinct toward action. She set the books down on the schoolhouse steps. She crossed the road. She looked up at him without fear and said, simply and directly, "You're going to fall off that horse in about 2 minutes. I'd rather you didn't do it in the street." Eli Cane looked down at her for a long moment. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been told worse." "I'm sure you have," she said. "Can you dismount or do you need help?" He needed help. He wouldn't admit it, but he needed it, and Clara Voss gave it without making him feel the weight of receiving it. She was a widow of 3 years, small in frame but immovable in character, with dark brown hair pinned practically at her neck and hands that were accustomed to work. The town had loved her husband, a good farmer named Thomas, and they had transferred a portion of that goodwill to Clara, but only a portion. She had a habit of thinking for herself, which Dusthaven tolerated in the same way it tolerated the summer heat, with resignation and mild resentment. She brought Eli to the back room of her property, which connected to the schoolhouse, and she sent for no doctor because Dusthaven had none. She removed the bullet herself with a steadiness that made Eli, who had faced 12 men across open ground and never blinked, quietly impressed. She didn't speak much while she worked. Neither did he. When it was done and he was cleaned and bandaged and half-conscious on her spare cot, she said, "Sleep. You're safe here." He slept for 14 hours. The town noticed within a day. In Dusthaven, everything was noticed. Mayor Harlan Prout noticed most of all. He was a large, well-dressed man with small, well-hidden eyes and the particular confidence of someone who had never once been held accountable for anything. He ran Dusthaven not through affection but through architecture. He controlled the water rights, the land deeds, and the ear of every man who owed him a favor, which was most of them. He sat behind his desk in the town hall and listened to his deputy, Silas Greed, relay the morning's gossip, and when Silas mentioned that Clara Voss was housing the gunman Eli Cane, Prout set down his pen very slowly and folded his hands. "That's so," he said. "Yes, sir," said Silas. "Half the town's already talking." Prout nodded, thoughtfully. He had been waiting for a reason to deal with Clara Voss. He had a surveyor's report locked in his bottom drawer that described, in careful technical language, a significant silver deposit running directly beneath the eastern field of her property. He had offered to buy that land twice. She had declined twice, pleasantly and firmly, in the way that honest people decline dishonest offers without leaving room for negotiation. She had been up to this point untouchable. The town liked her. The children adored her. But now she was harboring a notorious gunman. "Keep watching," Prout told Silas, "and start asking around about what people think." Over the following 3 weeks, Eli Cane did something that no one in Dusthaven expected. He stayed. He recovered slowly and he helped where he could, repairing the schoolhouse roof, hauling lumber, mending the fence along the east road. He was quiet with adults and unexpectedly patient with children. He didn't drink at the saloon. He didn't provoke anyone. He simply existed in Dusthaven with a kind of stubborn calm that unsettled people far more than aggression would have. And every evening, without announcement, he and Clara sat on her porch steps and talked while the desert cooled around them, two people learning the particular geography of each other's silences. The town watched, and Mayor Prout planned. On the 22nd day, Sela's greed planted a canvas bag of stolen silver coins beneath the floorboards of Clara's schoolroom. On the 23rd day, he made sure it was found. The tribunal lasted 40 minutes. The vote was 11-4. Clara Voss, teacher, widow, and the only person in Dusthaven who had seen Eli Cane as a man worth knowing, was given 1 hour to collect her belongings and leave the town permanently. She packed a single bag. She didn't cry. She walked out of Dusthaven with her head lifted and her eyes forward, flanked by Sela's and 2 men with rifles, and she did not look back. But Eli watched her go. He stood at the edge of the road in the long amber light of the dying afternoon, absolutely still, and he watched until the dust swallowed her silhouette entirely. Then he stood there a while longer, looking at nothing, his hands loose at his sides. The sun bled itself out across the horizon. Eli walked to his horse. He opened his saddlebag. He checked both revolvers with the slow, deliberate attention of a man who is making a decision he will not revisit. Then he stood in the last red light of the desert evening and spoke to no one, to the wind, to the dust, to the hollow quiet where Clara used to be. "By dawn," he said quietly, "your fate will be sealed." Then he rode into the dark. The desert at night was no place for a man in a hurry, but Eli Cane rode like the darkness owed him something. He pushed hard through the first hours, navigating by starlight and instinct across terrain that would have swallowed a lesser rider whole. The New Mexico wilderness didn't care about justice or anger or love lost. It only cared whether you knew where the rocks were and whether your horse trusted you enough to keep moving when it couldn't see. Eli's horse, a dark roan he called November, trusted him completely. They rode as one thing through the cold desert night, kicking up pale dust that dissolved behind them like a secret. He had 2 days' ride ahead of him, and he used every hour of both. By the time Eli reached the town of Red Rock Station and dismounted outside the United States Marshal's office, November was spent and Eli wasn't far behind. He tied the horse at the post, reached into his saddlebag and removed a small leather journal, dark brown, worn soft at the corners, its pages dense with careful handwriting. He held it for a moment in both hands like a man holding something sacred. Then he straightened his hat, walked up the 3 wooden steps, and knocked once. Marshal Deacon Holt answered the door in his undershirt with a coffee cup in one hand and the expression of a man who had seen enough of the world to be unsurprised by most of it. He was 60 years old, lean as winter timber, with a white mustache and the patient, measuring eyes of someone who had spent 4 decades separating truth from performance. He looked at Eli Cane on his doorstep and said nothing for a moment. "Marshal," said Eli, "I need you to read something." Holt stepped back and opened the door wider. Inside, under the yellow light of a kerosene lamp, Holt read Clara's journal from the first page to the last without speaking. Eli sat across from him and drank 2 cups of water and watched the marshal's expression move through quiet surprise, then controlled fury, then the particular stillness of a man assembling a plan. When Holt finished, he closed the journal gently and set it on the desk as though it were evidence, which it was. 5 years, Holt said. "She documented everything," Eli said. "Every forged deed, every bribe, every man he threatened. Names, dates, amounts. She kept it hidden beneath the schoolhouse floorboards." Holt looked at him steadily. "And she gave this to you?" "She gave it to me the night before the tribunal," Eli said. "Told me where it was. Told me what to do with it if things went wrong." Holt was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "Smart woman." "The smartest I've ever met," said Eli, and there was nothing boastful in it. It was simply the truth, stated plainly. Holt stood, walked to the wall where his badge and gun belt hung on matching pegs, and began putting them on with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had done it 10,000 times. "I'll need 6 deputies and a federal warrant," he said. "Give me until midnight." Eli nodded. "I'll be ready." Back in Dusthaven, nobody was ready for anything except celebration. Mayor Prout had wasted no time. Within 24 hours of Clara's banishment, he had produced a deed transfer document, forged with professional precision, claiming Clara had sold her eastern property to the Dusthaven Municipal Development Fund, which was, in practical terms, Harlan Prout wearing a different hat. He filed it with the county recorder's office through a man in Santa Fe who owed him a considerable favor and asked no questions. That evening, Prout hosted a dinner in the town hall for 12 of Dusthaven's most prominent citizens. There was roasted pork and imported wine, and the warm, mutual comfort of men who have done something they'd prefer not to examine too closely. Prout toasted to Dusthaven's future. He toasted to progress. He did not toast to Clara Voss, but her absence was the guest of honor nonetheless. Only Deputy Sela's greed sat slightly apart from the celebration, his wine untouched, his eyes traveling occasionally to the window. "You're quiet," Prout observed from across the table. "Just thinking," said Sela's. "About what?" Sela's turned from the window slowly. "You sure the gunman just left? Men like Eli Cane don't just leave." Prout smiled the smile of a man who had never personally faced consequences. "He's gone, Sela's. What's he going to do, ride back and shoot the whole town?" He lifted his glass. "He's a wanted man in 2 territories. He rides back here, he gets arrested. He knows that." Sela's said nothing. He picked up his wine, he drank it. But his eyes went back to the window one more time before he looked away. Eli and the marshal's party rode through the second night in a tight, quiet formation, 7 men, 14 hooves, and 1 leather journal tucked in Eli's breast pocket, close to his heart. They reached the outskirts of Dusthaven an hour before dawn. Holt pulled his horse alongside Eli's and spoke in a low voice. "You go in first. Alone. Give me 10 minutes to get the deputies positioned on the east road." "And if they draw on me before 10 minutes?" Eli asked. Holt glanced at him sideways. "Then I suppose you'll manage." Eli almost smiled. He rode forward alone into the darkness, toward the sleeping town, toward the men who had stolen Clara's life and thought the cost would be nothing at all. The night watchman on Dusthaven's northern gate saw him first. The alarm bell rang out across the rooftops like a metal scream, shattering the pre-dawn silence, pulling Dusthaven violently awake. Lights appeared in windows. Boots hit floorboards. Prout sat upright in bed. Sela's was already dressed. Within 4 minutes, the main street of Dusthaven was alive with torchlight and fearful voices, and at the far end of it, motionless in the darkness beyond the last pool of light, sat Eli Cane on November, waiting with the patience of a man who knew exactly how this story ended. Sela's emerged from the shadows with 3 hired guns flanking him, rifles raised. "You've got nerve, Cane," Sela's called out, his voice tight but controlled. "Riding back here alone." Eli walked November slowly forward until the torchlight caught his face. He looked at Sela's. He looked at the 3 men beside him. Then he looked past all of them at the open windows and cracked doors where Dusthaven citizens watched in frightened silence. He raised his voice so every soul within earshot could hear him clearly. "Clara Voss is innocent," he said. "Every one of you knows it. Prout planted that silver. He forged her deed. He's been robbing this town for 5 years, and I can prove every word of it." He reached into his breast pocket and held up the journal. "This is Clara's record. 5 years of his crimes documented in her own hand. Names, dates, every man in this town he ever bribed or threatened, it's all here." Murmuring spread through the watching crowd like fire through dry grass. Sela's shifted his weight. "That's a lie, Anna." "Draw if you're drawing, Sela's," Eli said quietly. "Otherwise let me finish." Sela's drew. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds and would be described differently by every person who witnessed it, depending on where they stood and how fast they could follow a man's hands. What was agreed upon, universally, was this. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, not 4, not 5, 3, and when the dust and the ringing silence settled, all 3 hired guns were disarmed, their weapons lying in the dirt, and not one man among them had been touched anywhere that would require a bandage. Silas stood with an empty hand, staring at his own palm as though it belonged to someone else. Eli lowered his revolver without drama. From the east road came the sound of hooves, steady, unhurried, official. Marshal Deacon Holt rode into Dusthaven with 6 federal deputies behind him, badges catching the first gray light of approaching dawn, and the east road sealed like a door closing on everything Prout had built. Harlan Prout appeared in the doorway of the town hall in his suspenders and shirt sleeves, and for the first time in 20 years of unchallenged authority, he looked like exactly what he was, a small man who had borrowed other people's courage for so long he had forgot he possessed none of his own. He surveyed the scene before him with rapidly calculating eyes. Silas disarmed, 3 hired guns sitting in the dirt nursing bruised hands, 7 federal badges gleaming in the gray pre-dawn light, and Eli Cane sitting on his horse in the middle of the main street, unhurried and unharmed, holding a small leather journal like a judge holds a verdict. Prout straightened. He manufactured a smile from whatever reserve of performance he had left. "Marshal," he called out with practiced warmth, descending the town hall steps with his hands open and visible. "Whatever this man has told you, I assure you." "Harlan James Prout," said Marshal Holt, and something in the flatness of his voice cut Prout's sentence cleanly in half. Holt reached into his coat and produced a folded federal warrant with the unhurried certainty of a man who had done his paperwork. "You are under arrest on charges of land fraud, forgery, evidence tampering, bribery of municipal officials, and conspiracy against a private citizen of the New Mexico Territory." He looked at Prout over the warrant with those patient, measuring eyes. "I'd strongly advise you not to make this complicated." Prout looked at the warrant. He looked at the 6 deputies. He looked at Silas, who had the decency to look at the ground. The manufactured smile dissolved slowly, like sugar in rain, and what was underneath it was considerably less impressive. He said nothing. He put his hands out. The deputies cuffed him efficiently. The watching crowd exhaled as one. Then, from the eastern edge of town, came the sound of a single horse moving at an easy walk, unhurried, deliberate, as though arriving precisely on schedule. Clara Voss rode into Dusthaven at sunrise. She sat straight in the saddle with her dark hair loose around her shoulders and the full morning light breaking gold and vast behind her, and the sight of her returning to the town that had cast her out struck the gathered crowd with a complicated and deserved shame. She was not triumphant. She was not angry. She rode with the quiet, settled composure of a woman who had never doubted the outcome, because she had helped design it. She dismounted beside Eli, and he was down from November in the same moment, and they stood facing each other in the middle of Dusthaven's main street while the whole town watched and the sun climbed and the truth settled over everything like clean light after a long darkness. "You got there in time," she said. "You knew I would," he said. She almost smiled. "I had confidence in the plan." "Your plan," he said. "Our plan," she corrected quietly. And there it was, the thing that Dusthaven had not understood and Prout had never considered. Clara Voss had not been a victim waiting to be rescued. From the moment Prout's surveyor had been spotted on her land 8 months prior, from the moment she understood what was coming and why, she had been building a trap with the patience and precision of someone who understood that corrupt men always overreach when they believe they have already won. She had documented everything deliberately, methodically, knowing that the only evidence Prout could never forge or discredit was evidence written in her own hand over 5 years of witnessed crimes. She had needed one thing she couldn't provide herself, someone Prout would underestimate, someone the town would watch instead of her, someone who could ride 2 days in one direction while Prout looked the other way and exposed himself completely. She had needed Eli. And Eli, who had ridden into Dusthaven wounded and half-broken 6 weeks earlier looking for nothing more than a place to heal, had instead found something that rearranged every plan he thought he had for the remainder of his life. Marshal Holt approached them both and removed his hat briefly. "Ma'am," he said to Clara, with the particular respect men of genuine integrity reserve for people who have earned it the hard way, "your property deed will be restored by end of week. Pruitt's assets are frozen pending federal review." He paused. "That journal is the finest piece of civic documentation I've seen in 40 years of law work." Clara accepted this without false modesty. "I had time to be thorough," she said. Holt replaced his hat and turned to Eli. He studied him for a long moment with those old, honest eyes. "Dusthaven's going to need a sheriff," he said. "Somebody who knows how to handle himself and has enough sense not to misuse it." He let that sit in the air between them. "I could make it official before I ride out." Eli looked at the badge Holt was offering. He looked at the town around him, the ashamed faces in the windows, the children beginning to appear at the schoolhouse steps, the wide desert sky opening endlessly above the rooftops. Then he looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him with calm, clear eyes and said, "He doesn't need a badge to protect this town. He already did." Eli turned back to Holt. "I appreciate the offer, Marshal." Holt nodded slowly, unsurprised. He shook Eli's hand, tipped his hat to Clara, and rode out with his deputies and his prisoner without ceremony or delay, the way honest law works when it's working correctly. The town was quiet for a moment. Then old Walt Briggs, who ran the general store and had voted against Clara's banishment and spent 3 sleepless nights regretting it, walked out into the street and stood before her with his hat in both hands. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said simply. "We were foolish and we were frightened, and neither one is a good enough reason." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, not with indifference, but with the dignified generosity of someone who has decided that forgiveness is a more useful thing to carry than bitterness. "Then let's not be foolish again," she said. Others followed Walt's lead. Not all of them. Pride is a stubborn tenant, but enough. Enough that the texture of Dusthaven's main street felt different that morning, as though something that had been subtly, chronically wrong had been quietly corrected. Sila's greed, for his part, told the federal deputies everything before noon. Every name, every transaction, every order Pruitt had given, and every order he had followed. He was not forgiven for it, but he was useful, and usefulness in the law's eyes carries its own particular currency. In the weeks that followed, Dusthaven elected an honest man as mayor for the first time in a decade. The children returned to Clara's school. November was given the best stall at the livery and an embarrassing quantity of apples. Eli built a house on the eastern edge of Clara's property. Not on it, but beside it, close enough for comfort and far enough for intention. With his own hands and November's patience, and the quiet assistance of 3 townsmen who needed something useful to do with their guilt. On the evening he finished the last wall and hung the door, Clara came with 2 cups of coffee and stood in the open doorframe and looked at the single room, plain and honest and solidly made, and said it was the finest house she'd ever seen. Eli told her she was being generous. She told him she was being accurate. They drank the coffee on the new front steps while November grazed nearby, and the desert turned its familiar, extravagant colors at the edges where the sky met the land. Inside, above the fireplace, Eli had mounted a short wooden board with 2 iron pegs. One held his second revolver, cleaned, unloaded, and still. The other peg was empty. He kept 1 gun because he was not naive about the world, but the weight of it on his hip felt different now. Not lighter exactly, just no longer necessary in the way it had been every day before this one. He had ridden into Dusthaven a man defined by what he could destroy. He was leaving that man behind without going anywhere at all. The sun rose full and golden over Dusthaven that morning, and for the first time in years, so did the truth.